All right. Thank you very much for attending number 6 of Worldwide Slot Car Chat. I am your host, Greg Galb, otherwise known as Mr. Flippant on the various forums. And you can find me as Greg Galb on Facebook, of course. I've been slot racing for over 10 years, and I partake in both digital and analog slot car racing with both a digital and analog club in my area, which is the Seattle area. And Jeff, you want to do a quickie, and then we'll let Dale go in for whatever he wants to share.
Absolutely. Jeff Nagel, going as JD Nagel on forums. I've been doing this month and a half, 2 months, in various capacities of just getting my equipment together. I live in Indianapolis, hence the lightning strikes at IMS. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. And Dale, why don't you go ahead and share whatever you want to share.
My name is Dale Carson, and I go by the handle of the name Aloha, because I'm from Hawaii. So, if you look back at my history of slot car racing, I guess it started when I was about 5 years old, and I've gone through different iterations. It's kind of ironic when I look back about 10 or 15 years ago. I used to run HO and would run pretty competitively in the Northwest. Although I lived here in Hawaii, when I was traveling for work, I tried to segue off to at least make 1 or 2 races with Gary Vito and the people in the Northwest with HO slot cars. But I found as I got older, my eyes got really, really, really bad, and trying to see something up inches got a little bit difficult. In fact, my wife commented, Professor Hart, she goes, if you get something bigger, you'll be able to see it and to do more things with it. So that's the transition to 132nd about 4 years ago. Pretty much here in Hawaii, I'm the only show in town. I do have a friend here, Lance Salat, who you've seen lead up one of the postings. I do have a wood track that we built. Basically, most people know me from entering proxy racing. That's kind of where I am right now. I find it very interesting, and I think some of the comments, and Mr. Flippin, thank you for what you're doing, is this hobby doesn't know what borders are, and it's allowed people to cross borders around the world. In fact, we kind of kid on some of the proxies that they have more miles earned flying from country to country and state to state than we do. For some of us, not myself, because I work in the tow industry, they have more miles in a year than most people travel in a lifetime. So it's kind of ironic to see that. But it really has opened doors for me. I work in the hospitality industry, and I've been able to travel the world. But being able to go to Portugal and going in North America and Canada and being able to visit some of you folks and getting to meet you, it's really a great opportunity. I think the biggest shortfall that I have living in the islands, although it's a beautiful place, is when it comes to this hobby, it's very limited on what I think I can do. And I used to race and teach at Skip Barber, so a lot of the things that I put in my mind, I try to apply, what I would do with a raw automobile versus a setup versus a slot car. But the one thing that I take away from proxy racing is that when I have been able to host a race, is to be able to look at some of the ingenuity and some of the mindset that the people in this hobby go out and put together. And I think, for me, that's my greatest learning curve. And being able to go to like Dennis Sampson's place or, different people on the mainland and actually see their tracks, see what they do and produce is really quite interesting. So, the hobby is a full array of different levels, if I can say that, from the common hobbyist who we want more of, to just to get in and get a slot car and find what it is capable of doing. And I know that, a number of you are into digital racing, which in itself is probably the era of the future. But it's also just really cool just to see what people can do from the levels and the dynamics that they have. And I know in a couple of classes that I'm in right now with building against people like F1 Fan or CG Racer or Smokio, all of which are names that are legends in my mind after being in this industry or being around this for 4 years. It's really neat. I worked off and on with a gentleman who was trying to do a slot car magazine, which is really difficult in this day and age of not having it dynamically linked. but it's just something that we just need more generations to have an awareness of trying to take what is a 132nd or 164th or 120th scale to a 1-to-1 and be able to not only, Porsche Cayman or something that you learn about. So, all of that's very interesting. But again, it's special to be in the hobby. It's a tough morning for me. I'm in the process. I have to lay off about 1,100 people today. So I'm not excited about what I have to do the rest of the day, but I did want to reach out and just say thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and, to see some smiling faces there on the screen. And, it is a great hobby. And thank you, Greg, for all that you're doing to allow this to continue. And I think through this forum and through Zoom and that, more people will become engaged in doing things like this. I think that's important to help grow the hobby. And more than anything else, the camaraderie across borders. And, to me, that's what's most important in this day, especially for so, be safe, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak for a few moments. It's a real pleasure. And again, I'm Aloha, and if there's anything I can do in Hawaii, you can find me on the HR forum. I'd be happy to help in any way. Thank you, everyone. Mahalo.
All right, thank you very much for that. And we got some returning members. I saw Nick Kurzweil on here a moment ago. I don't see here in the list anymore unless he changed his name. Oh, yep, there he is. So we'll get back to him if he wants to share. We'll go Andy and Graham and Richard for quick introductions before we start moving on to topics. Andy, go ahead. Oh, you're still muted. Let me unmute everybody here.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
New headset too, yeah. Hi, Andy Pinchak. DVD 3500 on most of the slot car forums, sometimes Carrera RP. And born in Ohio, raised in Michigan, did not cause any conflicts as far as football is concerned in my upbringing, because I didn't care for either. And I now live in Germany, only about 5 miles from the Hockenheim ring. So there's a slot car club there that I go to, and but at home we mostly race digital because of the lack of space. So we get as many cars and as much chaos as possible in a small area.
Excellent. And Graham, would you like to do a quickie? Not working. Let me hit unmute here.
There, how's that?
Alrighty.
No. Okay, I'm Graham. I'm NASCAR 03 on most of the forums. And I was in the hobby in the 60s. I got back in again 15 years ago and just have fun with it. I'm not a competitive racer anymore. I don't do anything. I just set up track. I've made my own wooden tracks. And I just have fun. Play with some friends and introduce the grandkids to it. They all have a ball too, because it's different than video games, right?
That's what it's all about, having fun.
Yeah. No, I'm on the West Coast. I'm in near Vancouver. I'm in Langley, BC. So
all right, thank you.
That's where I play.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Mr. Perry should be able to go.
Oh, hello. Okay, so I'm Richard Perry. You might know me from the forums as Mr. Modifier. I also, like Andy, enjoy the digital carnage in the small space, run one of the handful of digital clubs in the UK. And yeah, I am competitive, but we're all good friends after the end of the race.
Excellent. Yeah, usually that's the way it is. Alan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alan Wilkinson, known as Non-Fractal on just about every forum or anything I do online. I'm mainly an analog racer, but I've been doing some digital racing over the last 2-3 years. Been racing for about 4 years now. Just picked it up 4 years ago, and just picking up stuff and modifying cars and making them go quicker and racing and not improving as quickly as I think I should be. That's me.
All right, thank you, Alan. Nick, I see you're still in the list. Did you want to introduce yourself at all? Mr. Kurzweil? I'll unmute you. Oh, I think I muted you. All right. Nope, we're playing mute tag. I'll let you do it. I still show muted. You want me to do it? Okay. I think because I did it, you're not allowed to undo it.
How's that?
There we go. Go ahead.
There we go. Evening, gentlemen. My name's Nick. I'll go on the forums as Nick Kurzweil. That's my name. None of these silly AKAs people go by. Member of Rockingham Slot Car Club in Corby in the UK. Mainly analog racing. Race the Disca digital races along with Alan. Started about 5 years ago. It all started as a bit of a joke. Had Skylectric when I was a kid, and I said to my wife just jokingly before one Christmas, "Oh, I'd love to have another Skylectric set." Skylectric set turned up under the Christmas tree. Over the next 12 months after that, I bought about another 6 sets added to that. And then I discovered club racing, and it hasn't stopped since then. Mainly, I've done some CSCRA stuff. I don't know whether many of you guys know what that is. Alan will know what that is. And the classic racing, some of it's metal chassis, some of it's plastic chassis, all 132 scale. Some NSR stuff, done the NSR Championship here in the UK a few times, and Disca racing, as I say. That's me, really.
All right, perfect. And we have a couple people who are microphone only. Gordon, if you'd like to join in, I'll let you spend a minute on that. Give him a sec here. All right, not hearing anything else and not seeing any other waving hands at people who aren't able to unmute themselves. We'll go ahead and move on. Does anybody have any news or interesting things that they'd like to share today? I've got some topics that people suggested, but I want to just kind of open up the floor in case somebody has a question or a topic or news item or anything that they want to bring up or talk about. Don't hurt yourself, Alan.
Okay. Sorry, too much brain ache. Too much brain ache.
No
I'm
worries.
just going to listen today.
Okay, so I'll assume that silence means nobody has any pressing questions either. All right, so some of the topics that were suggested, and I'll just start from the top as people suggested them. The first one that I wrote down was slot car books, and maybe what kind of books you have that you felt are useful. I meant to grab mine. I'm going to go grab mine now, but if you've got any slot car books that you want to talk about or share, that might be.
I just so happened to have right next to me.
I'll let you start then.
Racing and there are 2 books by Robert. I'm not sure how it was. Schleicher. In German it would be Schleicher, which means he who slides along like a snake, which is not a great name, but anyway. He wrote 2 books. There's this one and then the Slot Car Bible. These were the first 2 books I ever got. Here's the Slot Car Bible. These were the first 2 books I got when I got back into it in 2013. What I really liked about them is he covers pretty much everything, the whole gambit, even a little bit of HO and stuff. I mean, but that's exactly the problem with the books at the same time. He doesn't go into too much depth of anything. If you're really into digital, there are dedicated books, you know, about digital like this one, you know, slot car racing in digital age, stuff like that. So that's the most complete. The really cool thing though about it is also he goes into like track layouts. There's lots of track layouts in there. So if you're getting started and you have an idea, you know, he gives you all kinds of ideas. And they're all old. And I don't think the newest book in here is maybe from 2010. But you know, realistically, not a lot has changed. I mean, you have to know things like SCX. I forget who mentioned it earlier. SCX is kind of dead. Ninco's coughing up blood. So anything you read about those brands in here, you have to take that with a grain of salt. But as far as Skylectric and Carrera are concerned, he talks about, you know, modifying Carrera cars, make them work on Skylectric track, stuff like that. So, you know, because a lot of people, one of the things we talked about, I think in the very, very first call, or you guys talked about, I wasn't there, was getting people into the hobby. And I think, you know, having something like this that somebody could pass around sort of like in a library fashion is not a bad thing. both of the books, particularly from him, they go into a lot of individual cars, which I never understand. And in an internet age, I'm kind of like, a review of a car can just go up on a web page, and I can look it up if I'm interested in that car. I think for what it costs, you mentioned it. The guy from Hawaii, I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name. Dale, that's it. Printing books, pages, magazines, in today's day and age, especially for something that's as transient as the car you like. I mean, that's like the partner that you like. That's going to be completely different for everybody. So I was a little surprised on that. I've got a whole stack of other books, but I think I've got just about every book in the English language that's been printed on it that has been printed in the 21st century. I'm sure there are quite a few books from the 60s that I don't have, but because I don't have any technology from the 60s, I'm not too worried about that. I have some German books from the 60s, which is interesting to read, but unless somebody speaks German, I won't bore you guys with that.
Ich habe nicht mein Buch. That's what I remember from German class. Use that
with a name like Gaub.
I mean, it was like obligatory that I learned, and of course, I was an army brat, and my dad was stationed in Germany. I forget what the base was, and of course, I was a toddler, and so I spoke fluent German because I went to both the American preschool kindergarten on base and then a German preschool kindergarten off base. So, but of course, I forgot all of that by the time I hit high school. But I figured in high school, I'd go ahead and study German because, yeah. But yeah, that was fun to say. And of course, I would tease the German teacher by saying, "Ich habe nicht mein Butch," and then she would correct my pronunciation. And then I would go off and roam the hallways while I got my book.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, John F. Kennedy actually said, "I'm a jelly donut" when he was
on the Berlin Wall. Ein Berliner.
Yeah, that's a jelly donut. Sort of mispronunciation.
So on the topic of car books, I got...
Yeah, just real quick. And this is the ultimate guide written by Adrian Norman, who hopefully will show up here someday. I actually have it signed by him when I got to the UK Slot Fest in 2018. It's for anybody who's into Scalextric book cars. There are omissions. They specifically call it the ultimate because they know they miss stuff, and this is the 8th edition. So if you're into that, if you are into that, that's probably the book you want to get. But anyway, sorry, Greg, you go ahead.
No, you take all the time you need. Are you ready for other people to chime in? Okay, I'll go ahead and chime in. So I have 2 whole slot car books. Both by Dave Chang, and I think the reason I got the first one is because it's the newer digital slot car racing. Of course, that's probably mirrored for people who are looking at this. Digital slot car racing in 1/32 scale by Dave Chang, otherwise known as Astro. Yep, that's the one. On Slot Forum, I'm not sure what other forums he was on, but I'm pretty sure Astro was his Slot Forum handle. And it basically goes over all of the different systems, SCX Digital, Carrera, Scalextric, and even has a little bit of Oxygen and Scorpius in here. At the time, they were fairly nascent in their development. But that's a really good primer for anybody who's interested in digital but doesn't know what system they want to use, or even if they have already chosen a system, they can learn quite a bit about the system they've chosen from that section in that book. And it has a lot of kind of basic, how to get the most out of your digital system and how to make sure your cars run well on your digital system and stuff like that. And the other book that I have is more of a general slot car book. It's also by Dave Chang. You probably have this one too, Andy. Yep, there you go. Slot Car Handbook for 1/32 scale. Definitive guide to setting up and running Scalextric style 1/32 scale ready to race slot cars. I learned a bit from this, but by the time that I had gotten this, I had already learned quite a bit from the analog club that I race with and just tinkering and stuff. But it was nice to kind of see the way that he does his books is really nice. Lots of big pictures, very specific description for everything. And I don't know why this didn't occur to me, but you mentioned kind of loaning these out to people like library books. I'm like, well, geez, they've been sitting on my shelf collecting dust all this time. I've got new members joining the clubs, both of the clubs that I race with all the time. I'm gonna put these with my slot stuff and remember to bring them with me and say, hey, you want to borrow this? Yeah, here, go ahead and borrow this. That's a great idea. Yeah, that's all. Anybody else want to talk about books?
Just to say that maybe the whole thing about printed matter is now sort of so old-fashioned, in that I see so much going on now that's online, and even slot car magazines. I think SCM, which is Rick Woods and Mark Abbott, I mean, they do print it still, but I should imagine that most of their sales are online. And I see some really good resources online for setting up cars. I mean, Slot Racer Online are putting together quite a good kind of how-to guide. And so if anybody's ever asking me, you know, where should I go, what should I look at, what do I need to get started, I would always reference them to online forums and to discussion forums, because there's lots of resource there, and it's not just a one-way consumption of information. There are a lot of people there who are willing to give you their opinion. And, a guy I used to race with, when he gave me some very good advice. He said, everyone will have an opinion, and it's your choice whether to take that opinion on board or not. And only listen to the people who are winning. That was quite a good one. So as far as printed matter goes, I'm sure there are some good things out there. I'm not really sure there'll be anything new out there coming our way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I usually tell people about the various forums that I go to on a regular basis, and I tell people the same thing. You know, go look online. There's a couple people on YouTube doing consistent, you know, videos on. I think Gary Skip is one of them who does consistent videos, and others who consistently do, you know, tuning tips and other kinds of videos on, you know, slot cars of all different kinds. And there's like you said, there's tons of resources out there. And I'm not like a book guy. I don't read that much. I can read, but don't do the hard copy stuff quite so much. But I will agree that with the book lovers that there's still something about having that hard copy rather than looking at a screen or watching a video. So I think I'll still bring those with me, but you know, I'm certainly not going to stop telling people to check out Slot Forum or Slot Racer Online or all those various other forums and YouTube videos and things. Does anybody else want to comment on that topic before I move on? Jeff, let me make sure you're unmuted. All right. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, you make a great point, you and Andy as well. It's the electronic that is going to, for some of you, you may be interested to get that younger generation involved. I think first time we met, Alan, you'd said when you run into the Wine, Women, and Song, you go bye-bye slot cars, and it's like, hey, look at this guitar, you still have those. She's chasing girls and doing whatever, but eventually it comes back, right? And you're like, wow, I remember this. And then it's just, to Nick's point, it never stops. And yeah, the younger generation is going to seek out online first, I think, as opposed to some sort of a hard cover thing, because I mean, that information can be maybe not so much in this realm, but in other realms, it's antiquated. But it's good to have the history, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the hardcover books at this point, especially the digital one, is pretty much just historical documentation. There's still a few snippets of useful information in there, but so much of it has moved on and improved and changed, and you know, new systems. And I mean, the Scorpius stuff in that digital book is like just a couple of pages. It's super basic. Same with Oxygen, because they were so brand new at the time. So yeah, online is pretty much the way to get the latest information. Everybody knows if you want to know something, Google it. So that's definitely not going away. And I think Alan's point is well made, that there's probably just not going to be a whole lot more printed, just because it's just not profitable. It's not even break-evenable. So probably not going to happen other than online, and then print your own, I guess, if you really love hard copy. All right, so I think we're good on that top. Oh, Richard, let me unmute you here. Where are people moving around the list all the time? I need to figure out how to make the list stay still. Should be able to. There we go.
You can better hear me now. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think it's a lot about nostalgia, because people of our age, the nostalgia comes in the printed word. And the problem is the economics of it. Our market just isn't big enough to have the high production values that we would like to see in books. And so books have to be quite broad in order to have an appeal. And if they're broad, they're not very deep. So they become signposts. And as you say, 2 pages on Scorpius isn't enough to do anything other than signpost you. There's this thing called Scorpius that you might want to look at. And that function is served by forums now. And even forums are actually nostalgic and old school. I don't understand Facebook. It always confuses me every time I go to it 3 or 4 times a year. It looks different. But our nostalgia is vinyl. You know, my 27-year-old daughter's nostalgia is CDs. But my son doesn't even have CDs. They don't exist. You know, it's online and streaming. You know, so I think, you know, you're right. A book is a nice thing, but it has to have a big commercial hook to be worthwhile. Otherwise, it becomes, you know, the only way to do it is self-publishing. The problem with self-publishing, they call it vanity publishing for a reason, because it's if you're paying for it to publish it, you may as well just get on your own hobby horse and forget the balance and the unbiased. Just go for it. So I think anything that's this niche market is probably dead as far as the printed book is concerned, which is a shame, because I love those coffee table books with pictures of vintage cars and so on, and there is still a market for that. The Skeletrix books, I mean, the only Skeletrix book that I have is this one. You may recognise it. It's a Skeletrix book based on the James May program. So that was 10 years ago. So this actually helps. This is good for me because it dates when I got back into slot cars, which was 2010. But the problem is it lists all the Skeletrix cars ever made up to 2010, but I have no idea what was done after that. So they're immediately out of date, even before they go to print. You know, so I think, yeah, much as I do like a good book, I think if you want information and to move forward, it's probably a dead dodo now.
Yep, a day at the slot car races. I don't think anybody's mentioned that one. What's that one about, Graham? Let me unmute you here. Graham's iPad. I still can't hear you, Graham. I think I flipped a switch, so you might.
There we go.
All right, go ahead.
Is this backwards? You guys seeing this backwards?
No, I'm seeing it straight.
Oh, okay.
That's all right.
This book was actually made in 2018, and it's quite a thick book. And this Carlo Tanalesi made it, and I think it's in Canada. I'm not sure how far it got, but he's still making this book. It tells a story about slot cars and different things at the front. And then the last half of the book is they talk to manufacturers. They talk to Dave Kennedy, of course, and because he was a rep, and they talked to reps from Scalextric and all the brands. And those guys talked about the future, what they saw the future. So they each had 3 or 4 pages in here. But anyway, it was a book I won in a forum, actually, Slot Car Mods on Facebook. And I won this book, and it's a pretty good read, but I'm surprised it's still being made. And like you say, it was old as soon as it arrived at my house, but still, it's a book to read and on the subjects. And then he made this one in 2019, so he's still making books. But this one is more of a retro thing, you know, what we did back in the day. And this is the kind of stuff I tried to make in the 60s, right? So this book is kind of a retro book. So he knew it was out of date when he was making it, but it still has a lot of the old cars and stuff in it. So again, by the same guy. So he's trying to make a go of it. 2018, 2019, still making books.
Good Christmas presents for grandpas, I think.
Yeah.
I'm surprised
That's why I have them.
2018 and 2019. That's astonishing, honestly.
Yeah.
It's the last Iceman, isn't it? I think you know, there's always going to be somebody keeping the flame burning. There's not a market for dozens and dozens of titles. Our market just isn't big enough. But the odd 1 or 2 could very well keep going for years.
Yeah, all of us will buy one.
Well, now it's been advertised here. Yep.
Yep, I bet there'll be a little increase in those sales. Look at all
I
that.
hardly ever paid more than 5 or 10 euros for any of these books. I mean, the Adrian Norman book was, of course, brand new, so but most of the other ones, if you wait long enough, you can get them for real cheap, which kind of says what to everybody's point about the market. but everybody keeps talking about, you Google it, you Google it, you Google it. I know you wanted to get to some other topic, Greg, but that's something I think I mentioned in one of the other calls. When I started getting back into this in 2013, I actually found it really, really hard to find information about slot car racing because it shares so much vocabulary with so many other types of model car racing, like radio controlled and regular racing. I wanted to find out if there was ever a slot car made of a Firebird Trans Am, and you put in slot car Firebird Trans Am, and it came up with a link for some place in Vegas because the slot machines, it was called Firebird, and Google doesn't really work that well. It wasn't until I found the forums, to Richard's point, they're kind of old fashioned, but yeah, all the information is stuck in these forums, but it's still the problem with Google is I've been using the same computer for so long. It kind of always sends me to where I've already been. So I don't know what it would be like today for somebody with a completely, excuse the expression, virgin computer to Google something on slot cars if they could actually find it or not. I don't know. Do you guys have did you have a similar experience or?
It's the opposite problem, the old problem. When I was a kid, when I wanted to research something, I had to wait for the library to open. I had to go to the library. I had to find the right book. And then I could read, if I found a book, I could read it, and that would be the facts in front of me. And with my son, who's 14, his biggest problem is he Googles something and he gets a million results. And whereas it was easy for us to filter, whatever we found was it. Now he gets so many results. He's understanding the good data from the bad data. You're right. It's filtering. It's exactly the opposite problem of what we used to have. And now there's too much information, and figuring out where the good stuff is in your search terms. You're looking for stuff on eBay. Unless your search term is absolutely perfect, you can spend ages finding all sorts of interesting goods, but not actually the thing you were looking for. There's just so much data. The real skill now is actually coming up with the search term.
A couple of 3 years ago, I had a go at the CSCRA National Trans Am series, and for the under 2 litre class, I wanted to build a Ford Escort with a metal chassis on it. Do not Google Trans Am Escorts. Don't do it. The results are shocking. Don't do it.
Well, that's what the internet's for, right? Pornography. Even the Simpsons said that. All the other stuff is, that's just clear coding to make sure that people pay money for it. But what it's really for is pornography.
And searching has gotten worse, partly because there are so many companies trying to make money off the internet that they will pay search engines to show their results for a single word. And so, yeah, they get put up higher on the list because, you're looking for slot car, Trans Am, Firebird or whatever. And then, the Firebird Casino comes up because Firebird is paying extra money to have any search that includes Firebird come up, put their link up higher. And so, yeah, it's I'm sure kids these days are quite challenged coming up with, how do you decide which one to believe, to put any stock in. If you see, ad or, paid for or sponsored or something like that, you can dismiss it out of hand, but that might still lose you some valuable information. And then, of course, the good stuff might be, 3 or 4 pages away.
Yeah, to Richard's point, I mean, my analog surround system gave up the ghost after 15 years. Literally, we could see the smoke rise as it went to electronic heaven. And after about a half hour of trying to find a receiver that still has like a record player connection for it, because the record players need a preamp and all that kind of stuff, I just went back to the place where I bought the original one from. Thank goodness they're still in business, and just said, these are the devices I have. Give me some options, because I could not find anything online on that. And a similar problem I had.
So,
shipping to Germany would have been probably pretty expensive.
It's the nostalgia thing. I think we hang on to things for way too long. And I had a fantastic system that I bought about 20 years ago. I spent about £500 on the CD player, £500 on the amp, £500 on the power amp, and £500 on the speakers. So it cost me about £2,000 for this amazing system. I still have the speakers now. Everything else has disappeared. And I've actually replaced it with a tiny little thing the size of a box of Cook's matches, that's Bluetooth to my phone that punches out 100 watts into each speaker, and the sound quality is brilliant. And it's just astonishing. It's not as good as my £2,000 system, but it's not far off, and it cost me 35 quid. It's just bonkers.
Where's your song, Rich?
Yeah.
And then one of the things that once you did get into the slot forum and you did start finding the information, people would sometimes just throw out a term like, well, you need a slot at motor pod, and then you finally figure out slot it's a company and not somebody put a period in the wrong place, and then you find their webpage and they've got like 15 motor pods and you don't know which one you should take, and then you have to go back to the forum and ask again, and sometimes you get snippy answers. It's a real, I find it a real narrow area where you get really useful information where it doesn't turn into a religious war.
Yeah.
It's really, really tough. I think I interrupted somebody though with another point.
No, I think that was just me, but I find Facebook, and that's where I'm on quite a bit with a lot of the forums, whether it's slot cars or whether it's, I'm obviously into audio and stuff. I find the Facebook forums are almost, conversations back and forth like this. You put something out there, you ask a question, whatever, somebody will come back pretty quick. And then you get 2 or 3 people talking about it. I find that's the most up-to-date place to go. Like if somebody said, what motor pod do I need? By slot it, somebody will come in and say they've used 2 or 3 of them. So and that happens usually within half a day. So that's the most accurate stuff I can get is on there.
It's pay it forward, isn't it? I do that, and I had a lot of help when I started off because I was dazed and confused 10 years ago. When people ask questions on Slot Forum or Slot Racer online, if I can give them a decent answer, I will do. It's just returning the favor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a fella came on an audio forum the other day, and he didn't know an RCA cable from a speaker wire, and that's where he started. And somebody got after him right away, of course, because that's the world. But then somebody straightened him out, and off the guy was. He checked back in a day later, and he said, I went to the store and I bought this cord. And he said, I hooked it up and I learned something. Same with the slot car forums. I also find on Facebook I can follow along with somebody who's building, say they're building a track. And they come in every 3 or 4 days and they show pictures of what they've done since the last time they came in. Can't get any more up to date than that,
RCA phone are also very good for making connections on your slot car tracks, and also for pivot points for putting lighting on the track. I used a phono board connector on the base and a tube of aluminium with an LED on the top with a phono male phono on the top, and it plugs into my track, and you can adjust the angle.
Yeah, well, one fellow on the forum makes those lights, and he lives right here in Maple Ridge. He lives 20 minutes from me, Sean Spring, and he's on the forums quite a bit, and he actually makes those. That's his full-time job at home, and he makes those lights. He's a big deal on Carrera Digital, and he's got a little side business. So he makes and sells the lights, but he'll help you if you don't want to order them. He'll show pictures on how he makes them. He's also casting concrete barriers. The curved concrete barriers used on the highways. He made a cast form for those a couple of years ago, and he's only made a few molds, but he's casting those, but he can only make like 9 a day if he goes at it, right? Drying time and everything. But he casts and sells those online, plus tire walls. Never would have heard from him except he's on Facebook, and they say it turns out he's 20 minutes from me. So, and he has bi-weekly races at his place, at his house. So
yeah, he took exception. He took exception to me on Facebook when somebody was asking what digital system they should get. And I think the exact wording I said was the only advantage Carrera really has over Scalextric is that you can race 1/24 scale. And what I meant is that both systems are just as good, but he took it to mean that I was a Scalextric fanboy, and we got told off. We got told off by the moderator to keep it civil. But it's like, dude, believe me, there's a situation where Carrera is the best, but there's a situation where, in my opinion, Scalextric is probably a little bit better because when you don't have space, stuff like that. But which was really I was really surprised because I grew up on the Canadian border. I was like, that was the rudest a Canadian has ever been to me.
Yes.
It's a new world, and I think, our generation are used to that, but it's very easy to be very rude to people online through text. You've only got to look at what Donald Trump's putting out, that kind of thing. It's amazing, right the way up the scale, how rude people can be. The internet troll is a real phenomenon. And, there's no joke. It's like, don't feed the troll. I mean, I've been on forums where someone's taken exception or completely disagreed with something I've said, and don't just disagree with it, but really, really pour, acid on it. And I just don't reply because I just don't want to get into that discussion.
It's hard for a book to yell back at you. You're correct.
And
but you have to get used to that. And my wife, she goes on forums and somebody writes something bad, and there are those keyboard bravery people. And
books can hurt if someone throws one at you.
Well, that's true. I never buy hard copies, So, I guess sometime I'd like to hear about digital and whether you think the companies could ever get together. I don't want to change the topic right now, but
Well, it seems like we're about ready to move on to another topic, and that's a perfectly valid topic as far as I'm concerned. That's something that comes up pretty regularly in all the forums, usually because someone has one system and they want to be able to buy a car that was made by another manufacturer and just plop it on their track and run it without having to yank one chip out and put another chip in. Will they ever get together? No, it's a toy. They're competitive. They will never, ever get together. Will there be compatibility? Yes, we've already seen that, Slotted is making a chip that works on a variety of systems. Scorpius is promoting their chip as working on a variety of systems. So the cross compatibility is still going to rely on putting another chip into the car. If you buy a Scalextric digital car, it's still not going to work on a Carrera track until you put a different chip in there, regardless of the fact that both Scorpius and Oxygen can work on both systems. And there's still changes that you need to make. For Scalextric digital, turning your track into a Oxygen compatible track is as easy as slapping some magnets under the finish line for it to count the lap, because their chip works on Scalextric digital lane changers without any modification. For Oxygen to work on a Carrera track, you got to put the magnets under the track, but you also have to either create a special plug that goes into where a controller goes in, or you plug a controller in with the lane changer button taped down, and then you've got to kind of do magnets in a different way. It's a little bit more complicated. And then talk about trying to convert an Inco over to Oxygen or something like that, and you pretty much got to change all the electronics. With Scorpius, you pretty much got to change all the electronics except for running a Scorpius car on a Scalextric digital track, or if you want to do lap counting and all that stuff, then you've got to change something. I don't think anybody would say, no, I don't want the companies to get together and come up with a universal protocol that they can all, like DCC for train. That's the analogy that comes up. The train guys did it, but what I always hear, I haven't done train since I was a kid, but that continues on with basically the people who are familiar with the train situation saying, yeah, they can do a basic kind of thing, but then all the manufacturers then started splitting out and adding things that aren't cross-compatible, and so you're back in the same situation, because when it comes down to it, it's still a toy and they're still competing with one another. They don't want you to be able to buy a Hornby layout and put on a Lionel or Lifelike or whatever train on their track. They want you to buy their trains. Scalextric wants you to buy their cars. Carrera wants you to buy their cars. I think the only reason that Oxygen being Slotted and Scorpius don't have it locked down as a proprietary thing is because neither one of those companies, well, until recently, sold track, and Scorpius doesn't sell any track cars or anything. It's pure electronics, nothing else. And Slotted don't sell track up until Polycar track just came out. So they weren't real, hot and heavy on keeping the other manufacturers away either. So I don't think they're going to switch over and try to be proprietary. I think they're still going to be, continuing what they're doing. So it seems like Oxygen is probably the most all-encompassing, non-competitive system. But again, you're not going to grab a Scalextric car and slap it on an Oxygen track or vice versa. You're still going to have to change electronics from one to another.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could say otherwise, but I don't think it'll ever happen.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and that, especially that word that comes up every now and again, toy or toys, because for me, a toy is something that arrives in a box that you can give to a 16-year-old, and they can just do it. There you go sort that out. I don't see that there is any potential whatsoever that you give a 16-year-old all the pieces they need to build an Oxygen track of the cars, and they would get it done. I just don't see it. I mean, I struggle with it. I even struggle with the firmware updates and the whole thing about the controllers and how the controllers work. Oh, if you get onto the Slotted website and start pulling down Maurizio's documentation, it's like this stuff's been written by IBM or something. He's got that mindset. It is not kid-friendly. And if it's not kid-friendly, it's debatable whether you could call this stuff a toy now. And if you look at what we're doing at, say, the Disco events and how Gary Skip organizes that and all the technology that goes behind that. And even then, I've never been to a Disco event where everything's worked perfectly and the race didn't have to be stopped. And then Maurizio gets personally involved and hands-on on what's going wrong. It's not a toy when you're at that level, for sure.
Yeah, and Oxygen and Scorpius are definitely not in the toy categories. By pretty much any definition of toy. I mean, it's debatable that slotted cars or NSR and, the real high-level, expensive, race-ready cars are considered toys. But Scalextric consider their product toys. Carrera consider their product toys. Ninkos, SCX, all the manufacturers that provide a running set, that 16-year-old can plop down and throw together. Those are the toys. Those are the people that are never going to work together. And that's why Scorpius and Oxygen are the two companies that do try to get all those things to work together, because they're not really toys.
But it's the niche against the mass. You look at the size of Hornby and Carrera, they have to sell toys to the mass market because there's not enough of us enthusiasts to sustain their businesses. And you look at Slotted, it's interesting that Slotted has gone with Polycar and those fantastic little BRZ Subarus that he's chucking out for £22.50. The only way that Slotted is going to grow their market, because his specialist market is saturated. He can't sell anymore. The only way that he can expand his business now is to move into toys. You look at his BRZ Subarus, for about $27, probably £22.50 they're selling for in Pendles, which is half the price of a Slotted car. And the only thing that seems to be different is it's got a slightly lower powered motor and no motor pod. But everything else is Slotted. But if you can pump them out for that price, and it's about 60% of the price for Scalextric's car, that's where he's doing. He's putting a cheap product into the market to establish his market, the brand, and that's the only way Maurizio is going to make more money, is to expand into toys. We aren't a big enough market to sustain companies the size of Hornby and Carrera. We're just a little bit of extra profit, a little bit of icing on the cake. We're not the cake.
Yeah, but Maurizio does Slotted and the Oxygen and that as a hobby because he enjoys it very, very much. As you say, the Polycar is going to allow him to keep doing the slot car thing. But I mean, as Greg knows, Maurizio's bread and butter is in control systems. The slotted side of it is a very, very small part of Galileo engineering. It's only 30% of it, I believe. But it's great that he is catering for us in the niche market, but he's also got the entry one where I can buy polycar for my grandchildren, buy the set with the DRZ drift set or whatever, and get my grandchildren hooked. They're already hooked, but you know what I mean.
And he worked
There was a club class
on the ARC Pro system. Scalextric worked with Slotted, vice versa, to develop that system. So, you know, obviously they're getting some funding from Scalextric for, you know, that technology in some way. So, and that's another one of the rare things that you don't see very often, is that cross between companies. You know, you can take a Scalextric ARC Pro controller and flash new firmware, and it's an oxygen controller. You know, and hopefully someday we'll get new firmware for the base itself. But you know, it's nice to be able to do that, and that's only possible because Slotted and Scalextric work together. Slotted used their oxygen technology essentially for the ARC Pro system.
Yeah, I mean, Maurizio's unusual in this modern age. He's a collaborative type of businessman, which is great to see. You know, I think the business model, especially after this COVID-19 lockdown, people are going to have to collaborate to survive. You know, if you're a big company, yeah, you're going to get away with it. But, you know, medium-sized enterprises are going to need collaboration to move forward. And this guy's showing us a really good model of how you can do it. He's very open-minded.
In a couple hours, NASA is not putting a rocket up. They've contracted that out to somebody else. So there's some collaboration there at top level.
Yeah. Yeah, it's economies of scale, isn't it?
I think it's exactly 2 hours before it flies over us, Rich.
Yeah.
I think it's 10 to 10 it flies over, isn't it?
Yeah. NASA transferred all the risk to Elon Musk, basically. You know, if it blows up in midair, then NASA just won't pay the bill, probably.
Breach of contract.
I imagine they'll be on the hook for something, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting what you say about Maurizio. Yeah, Maurizio is a straight up guy because a few years ago, he was interested in seeing the shore change guide that I designed and had made, and I met him at Gaydon and gave him a few, but he's never copied it. He could so easily have gone into manufacturing with it, and there's not a lot I could have done about it. But no, he's played it straight, you know, and he's actually directed a few people at me. So that's the sort of thing that we'll see him. You know, yeah, he never gets involved in arguments on Slot Forum. He's always only ever helpful, and I think that's that's the way you got to be if you're going to be successful. Other manufacturers do themselves no favor.
Other manufacturers, well put.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this subject is petering out. Anybody have any last minute comments before I toss out another subject for us? All right, let me unmute you, Alan. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, whenever I talk to Maurizio, the one thing I never ask him is when. And, you know, when I first started chatting to him, he said, so you want to know when? I said, no, I'm never going to ask you when, Maurizio. I'm interested in what you're doing, how you're thinking. I'm not going to ask you when, because you don't know. So so there's no point in me asking. And he is an interesting guy, and he's got a lot of innovations. But it remains to be seen whether he can make the proper kind of toy market thing go. When I talked to someone from Scalextric at Gaydon last year, they said, we make our money out of sets. We don't make our money out of selling individual cars. We make our money out of selling sets. And that's a model that Maurizio definitely wants to go for. You can see it clearly happening. And I just hope he manages to do it.
I'm hoping to get one of those Subaru BRZ sets at some point so I can actually get some hands-on with the track, but that has not yet happened. But I don't foresee any complaints other than, you know, maybe it's a little bit tricky to get it completely fit together. We've got to use the little clippy things on the side and stuff like that. I've seen it in person. Alan over at Scale Racing had some of the track in stock, and I saw it and played with it with my own hands. Good track. I can't wait to actually pull a trigger on a car running on that track. And yeah, Maurizio, I mean, if you've ever met the man in person, then there's nothing that I can say to make that impression better, right? He's just the man, you know. He's super nice, always helpful, always interested in what you have to say, interested in what questions you have to ask, interested in your feedback on anything at all. And yeah, don't ask when.
I had a capacitor detach itself from a chip after an impact at a Rockingham Disco race. Maurizio happened to be there, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been John Underwood. Said, "Give it to Maurizio. Just go and have a word with him. Give it to him." Good as gold. He said, "Yeah, put it in a bag. Put your name, address, your email, blah 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 blah." Off he went with it. I don't know. 3 months went by, nothing. I thought, well, it's probably broken anyway, not a problem. Probably 2 weeks after I thought that, I'll get an email. Yeah, your chip's ready. $11, 11 euros. We'll send it to Pendle Slot Racing. You pay them, they'll send it to you. Good as gold. It took a while, but it happened. He made it happen. So no complaints from me.
Yeah, my first response to anybody who has any problem with any slotted product at all is contact, their support. And worst case scenario is, somebody, kind of gets a word back to Mauricio to, hey, check this guy's post on Slot Forum, and maybe you can help him out. And 99 times out of 100, if there's some issue with their product that they don't just replace outright, he'll say, send it in. He wants to know why the problem happened so that they can prevent it for the future. He's not going to say, well, you did something wrong, so you might as well buy, bin it and buy another one. He says, send it. If we can fix it, like in that case, we'll fix it. And if not, then they probably will just send you another one and say, thank you for sending us this failure so that we can improve our product. So, yeah. Maurizio is awesome. I've only met Maurizio Ferrari. I've never met the other Maurizio, Gilbernetti.
Nobody has. He's
pretty much just in Italy all the time. I kind of had that.
He's the silent partner.
Silent partner, yeah. But yeah, fantastic company. Can never say anything bad about them, pretty much. I see Mark joined in with his camera and everything. Did you want to say a quick hello, Mark?
Hi, guys. And Alan, you are who I thought you were. I'm slot loco and slot crazy on the UK forums, and I thought you were you that I'd met at the Disco in 2017. We chatted for quite a while. So hi.
Hi.
One thing, just one thing to add, guys. Just listening to what Greg's saying there. Where possible, try and work through your retailer or national distributor with the products, because Maurizio just gets such a huge volume. Some guy has a plastic wheel fall off in the States, the next minute Maurizio is trying to deal with it. You know what I mean, though, eh? So where you can, deal up through the chain. It also means that the local people are taking responsibility for what they're getting paid to do, which is to distribute the product. And hi, everybody. I'll have a browse through who else is here.
No, that's an excellent point, and you're right. And I do try to remember to do that, because absolutely, the retailer, especially with Alan Smith and at Scale Racing, he's Mauricio's right hand man sometimes, and if there's any problems, he'll call you up and talk to you about it over the phone for an hour when you only had a 5-minute conversation, but he'll still call and help you. Yeah, send it to me, replace it, or yeah. So absolutely, call wherever you bought it from, contact them first. If you don't get anything or they blow you off, then don't shop with them anymore, and then see who can help you. So yeah, any last minute additions to this? Well, we've moved on all kinds of topics. Anybody want to throw something out, or should I pull up another subject? All right, I'll dig in my pot here. All right, so this is something that I kind of wanted to get people's input on. This was my own suggestion for a topic. Fantasy cars. The most recent example I can give for this topic is the Scalextric Ratio or something. It's just kind of that weird floopy looking car that they used for their new Joker Batman and Joker car. And they've also released a version that is blue and yellow. And as watchers have come to realize, I love me a blue and yellow car. And so I'm all about that car. But not just because it's blue and yellow. I also like that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be a real car for me to like it. In fact, I like fantasy cars almost as much as I like real cars. So I'm all about getting that Recio, or however it's pronounced, supercar, Scalextric's fake supercar. And I think that kind of came from me not really growing up with motorsports, so I never watched racing, in real life or on TV or anything like that. But I did have a dad who liked popular science. And as who read popular science are probably aware, a lot of times you see concept cars. Well, pretty much every issue, there's going to be concept cars. And then in the back, the advertisements will have people selling, plans for kit cars. And they're always these futuristic, bizarre, prototype cars that are you never see them on the street except for pictures in Popular Science when somebody actually builds one of those kits and Popular Science does a story on it. So I've loved that kind of stuff since I was a kid. And it's always kind of bothered me when a real car manufacturer will do a really cool futuristic prototype car that never gets manufactured. I mean, for decades, they've been showing off really cool cars. And I'm like, yeah, make that. And then you get all the car people going, that looks terrible. I never want to see that car manufactured. But I'm like, what? That's cool. So I'm the guy who's going to buy that Scalextric car that doesn't exist in real life. And I kind of wanted to get everybody else's thoughts and opinions on that. If you're like me, why? If you're the opposite of me, why? Maybe you're both. I don't know. I mean, I like real cars as much as the next guy, but I'm not a rivet counter. I don't really care if a car is fake versus real. So.
You drive a Previa, Greg?
A what?
A Previa. Do you remember those?
I remember the name, but I don't remember what it looked like.
I think it was a Toyota or a Nissan. It was a minivan that basically looked like somebody left a lump of wax in the sun too long. It was absolutely horrid looking. And they tried to sell it on its looks.
I'll do you another one better, Andy. How about the Pontiac Aztec? You're telling me if I paint that blue and yellow, you're going to get one of those?
I would, absolutely.
As my first car ever was a Pontiac Trans Am, so you are talking to a Pontiac lover.
Well,
the Aztec really pushed my faith. Really pushed my faith. It had a really couple cool features. Had a built-in sleeping tent. Yeah, not too many cars can claim that. But yeah, it was a pretty ugly car.
I didn't think anyone could beat the Aztec as far as horrendous looks, but Elon Musk did it with that pickup. I don't know how the hell he did it, but he did it.
The Cybertruck.
Guys, for all of us non-stateside, Google Pontiac Aztec. Oh dear. Parental advisory warned.
George Turner made the effigy, the Holden effigy. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but I can't lay my hands on the resin kit. But he's made a brilliant kit of the Holden effigy, which is a modern take from about 3 years ago of a 1940s, 50s big American. It's now sort of like a lead sled, I guess. But look up this EFIJY. Look up the Holden effigy. Gorgeous.
Sort of car they would have driven in Sin City, the film.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was basically modelled. That was to celebrate the anniversary of the FX Holdens, which were the first Holdens made in Australia. And I saw it at one of the car shows in Brisbane, and it was magnificent.
Yeah,
the real car, big modern drivetrain, all the rest of it, and it was so cool. They should make that, but of course they were never going to.
No, but George Turner does it. You can have one in 1/32.
Oh, I have to try and get one of them then and repaint it up, because it was amazing looking car.
I just Googled that, and that is really cool. It's basically, like you said, a modernized lead sled. That looks fantastic. Prowler, the Plymouth Prowler, is one of my other favorites. a modernized, hot rod kind of thing. Every time I see one of those in real life, I'm like, that is just cool. I'd love to see a slot car of that. I think I had a model kit of it a long time ago, but slot car, that would be pretty tight. So yeah, I'm all over that kind of stuff. The Aztec, I will agree, not a pretty looking car.
Can I take you in a totally different direction as far as fantasy cars? Because I showed you last time I was on the chat, I showed you my my previous fantasy car, which was the Milk Float. Yep. Which is, for those of you that haven't been in Europe, that's actually an electric vehicle to deliver milk. And I also did a Golf version, which delivers oil. So I got thinking, what else can I make? And we've been chatting on my little group at the club about our favourite Matchbox cars, and I've just taken delivery in the post today of this, which is a 1972 Matchbox Tojo. It's a completely fictitious tow truck. The reason I bought it, even if it's battered state, is I'm going to take accurate measures, and this is going to be my next 1/32nd scale project. So I'm going to create a tow truck to race against my milk floats. So I'm living the fantasy dream. This was my favorite car when I was a kid. I'm going to make it now in 1/32nd scale.
You can get a lot of inspiration from Hot Wheels cars. They've got a lot of bizarre cars from back in the day, for sure.
Yeah. Richard, you do realize that it's things like this that cause the steel chassis guys to consign us all to the loony bin, eh?
Well, you can say that, but I mean, thingies were a very big thing in the 1960s, right? And these kind of whole genre of slot cars had no basis in reality whatsoever. And they were still fun to look at. I mean, I look at some of these thingies. There's even a thingies sub-forum on Slot Forum. And I'm thinking, these are great. I love these. And if you look at what, say, BSCRA are doing with their steel chassis, and you look at what's actually going on with the way their bodies are, which are Lexan bodies with stickers for their front wheels, I mean, no one can really claim that. But the device, the real divider, the car that really annoys people, I found, actually, is this one. Everyone will recognize this.
Oh, the Mosler.
Everyone will love or hate this car, the NSR Mosler, because it purports to be representation of a real car, and yet the scale is very, very, very manipulated. With no excuses. NSR were very proud that they've done this. They produced a race car, but it annoys people because it purports to be something that it's really not. It's not really a Mosler. It's a fantasy car, really. It's a kind of a thingy, really. So of you guys, who's a lover of the Mosler and who's the haters?
I had one, but it was just not the kind of car that I raced very much, and it wasn't blue and yellow. I had no personal affinity or attachment to it, so I sold it, for a good amount of money, which was always nice. Good return on investment on an NSR Mosler. But I had no problems with it. I mean, I bought it because it looked cool. And like I said earlier, I'm not a rivet counter. So if it's not only am I okay with completely fantasy cars, but when they're not perfect, they're not like people are measuring, how tall the top of the fender to the hood is. And it's like, wow, okay. I mean, if that's how you want to be, that's fine. I don't care. It still looks cool.
I don't know if you guys
I'm undecided.
see this.
If I buy a 10th one, I might come down on the side of Moslers. No, they're fabulous cars. Wonderful things to race. Great fun.
Wing cars.
Oh.
Yeah, those are crazy.
You can't call me that.
Yeah, and when you mentioned, Alan, thingies, I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, geez, that's literally an entire, I mean, pretty much all commercial 1/24 scale racing, pretty much. Obviously, there's some, scale, racing happening at that scale in commercial places, but it's primarily Lexan bodies that don't remotely resemble any car in real life, and even when they are said to be resembling of some kind of car, it's not. It's like even worse than the Mosler is as far as being accurate. And the irony is that a lot of those guys are hardcore motorsports fanatics. They're all driving their own Corvette C6s and stuff like that to their slot car race, and then they pop something on the track that looks like somebody took a lump of Play-Doh and threw it hard down on the track.
Well, here in Germany, we do most of the 124 scale is either a Carrera-based car. What's the other? Scale Auto, I think, also makes them, and then or they're scratch built. So there are like the club that's actually closest to me, I don't go to because it's like a 30-meter track that they do in 3 seconds or something like that. So and they have these wing things like that I just showed you in the Lexon and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean. I don't even know how they can do it. But to your point, Greg, I mean, I think I personally don't have a problem with fantasy cars. I kind of like it is the fact that they tend to be a lot less expensive than other cars that are based on real cars because there's no licensing involved. I love the GT Lightning and the LMP cars that have been in the Select Street catalog for at least I think almost 10 years now. But they still look somewhat realistic. The Razio or whatever it's called is a little bit too bulbous. It's sort of, you look at the cars in the 50s and the 60s, they were quite bulbous and voluptuous and flowing, and that's okay. That one, it looks a little too cartoony. I almost felt like it was like the taxi from Who Framed Roger Rabbit was what I thought when I first saw it.
Exaggerated, yeah.
Yeah, but I agree with you. In the sorry?
It was the Joker car. That's why they designed it.
Yeah.
The Joker car.
And I think it works well as the Joker car. But I agree with Greg, although that the livery, or however we pronounce it in American English, it's been over here too long. I don't sometimes say things the right, like I'll say aluminium sometimes. The livery does a lot too. I mean, if it's a color scheme that you like I'm a sucker for British Racing Green. I love the high contrast blue yellow like Greg, the Penske style. I'll even if the car never existed with that color, I'll probably buy it just because I love it.
That's one of the little problems I have with the Gulf. Just going on to liveries, just a second. Not every car that is released in Gulf livery raced in the Gulf livery, and I've lost my love for it. I have to be honest. I used to love the Gulf livery when I was younger, but it's just not everything raced in Gulf colours. And Jägermeister, they seem to have a thing for putting Jägermeister livery on anything they release. It's wrong. I'm sorry, it's wrong. I don't like it.
Ka-ching.
Italia, Martini.
Incidentally, Greg, in case you're wondering, it's pronounced ratio, and it's actually Welsh for racing.
That's cool. See, that just makes it even cooler to me.
There you go.
All right. Anybody else want to toss in on that?
Yeah. What about? I picked this up on Home Racing World a couple of weeks ago, where Harry was talking about the plethora of Porsche 9 ... How many more of these things are we going to make? And he showed like a resto mod or a custom mod car that you'd see from American Graffiti or something like that. I was like, yeah, that might be kind of cool to see something like that you can pick out, on any Saturday night in the downtown square somewhere where all these old guys are getting together with their cars, and you'll see that resto mod or what have you. It's like, that'd be kind of cool as a slot car if someone were to produce that, and no one would run into any kind of trademark infringement where they'd have to go talk to a manufacturer. It's like, yeah, just build it however you want. There's plenty of history out there for these cars.
Pioneer.
Yeah, I was just thinking Pioneer.
I can see them doing that kind of thing. Kind of looks like something. Then they definitely love just all kinds of random liveries. So I like Pioneer.
That whole livery thing never really did anything for me. For me, when I hear people collecting cars because, a new livery came out, I've got to have the Jägermeister one, I've got to have the Golf one, I've got to have this. Really, for me, unless the technology has changed underneath that paintwork to give me a technical advantage, I have no interest in it at all. No, I I have, I mean, you can see these type of things. They're not even painted, right? These are the print ones where they injection mold them with the red. So, you know, I'm not really that interested. But when I was talking to Andy Rowland about this, about how Polycar release, for example, their Formula One Classic series, they try and get it to a point where they get the most successful liveries to be released later, so that you all jump in on the technology, and then later you want to get more because of the livery. Again, it's never done anything for me. If the technology under the hood hasn't changed, I'm not going to buy another one of the same thing just because it's painted different.
I think
NSR F1s.
They're the worst. You know, their new bodies always come out as just a single color or like 3 or 4 color, you know, red, blue, and yellow plain bodies, and then 6 months later, then you've got the actual liveries. And so you've got the people who are like, oh, I got to have the new NSR. You know, we're racing NSRs for our next series or whatever. I'm going to put that new one on the track, and it's going to be awesome. And then 6 months later, everybody comes with their nice looking real livery NSR cars.
Or worse, you buy a plain coloured NSR and you livery it up, and then 6 months later they release it.
The same one that you just did, yeah.
It makes yours look really crap.
I'm still waiting for them to do the dang Bilstein Audi R8. Come on, NSR, what the heck? That's like...
Scalextric also have a nasty, nasty habit of doing that. Yeah. Don't they, Martin? We were going to enter the Disca 24-hour Le Mans. We did it with a Carrera Ford GT last year in just the Ford factory colours. This year, we were going to enter the nice purple Keating Motorsports Wins livery. Did it all, painted it, decored it. I did 2 of them, and it looked fabulous. I haven't got one here to show you currently. They're off for having the light kit updated. Got them all done, and then someone, I can't remember who it was, someone messaged me and said, oh, do you know Scalextric are doing that car? And I was like, oh, no. Gutted. Absolutely gutted.
Yep. All right. So, sounds like we're ready for another topic. Next.
I got one more livery to show you.
Okay.
It's a steampunk Mini. Yeah, Mad Max got hold of a Mini.
I like it. Market it.
Yeah. Takes ages to stick the watch parts on without them falling off, though.
You'd never be able to drive that in a top hat with goggles on the front, mate.
I tell you what, though, Martin, this extra bit of weight on this is won the Mini class in our club. It's about 10 grams heavier than anything else, but it goes like shit off a shiny travel.
Get in there.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's the one.
GT, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, I had it happen to me with one of the V8 supercars. I bought a repaint of
the ours on my phone.
SP Tools Van Gisbergen one, and it was signed by Van Gisbergen when he was in there. And then I guarantee 3 weeks later, Scalextric have released the same thing of their own. I'm like, God, you got to be kidding me. Anyway, I'm off to work, so I'll see you guys later on.
Cheers, Wayne.
Thanks, Wayne.
Have a good one.
I'll give you guys a hard luck
That's the one we made.
That's a good-looking car, Nick.
Beautiful.
Very pretty. I was very, very pleased with it, and then I found out Scalextric are actually going to make it, and I was gutted.
You did it first.
What's that, Mark?
I was hoping to race it.
Well, that's an Alpha 155 DTM, which I rather liked. And for those that don't know, I'm the slotted distributor in my country, and I set up a national invitation event for DTM cars to basically launch them in New Zealand because no one knew them in New Zealand. And so for the first year of this, or second year of this, I can't remember now, I created this livery. I thought it was a really pretty livery. Of all the Alpha 155s, I thought that was the prettiest livery I could create myself. And I put a huge amount of work into it. Had the decals made by a friend in Australia, put the car together, got the blue a bit dark, but Other than that, it looked pretty good. Ran the event. 1 week after the event, Slotted announced they're releasing it. How bad is that?
Yeah, see, at the club in Hockenheim that actually scratch build everything, you get extra points for it being a realistic livery and getting it as close to the real thing. They are rivet counters and stuff like that, and I'm never going to get that good. But I try to, the projects that I have, I'm very slow in getting my project. They tend to take about 3 years for me to get a car done. But I try to do things that people aren't expecting, like the Le Mans Spitfires, for example. Very few people know that Triumph raced in Le Mans. They actually won their class. And everybody sees it and they say, oh, it's a GT6. And it's not a GT6, it's a Spitfire. But, you know, but you can get a GT6 model and you can, and when you ask around, I mean, like, I know that the Le Mans Spitfire has been done on 132, but they've not been done on 125th. But it's interesting that all you guys have had these liveries made by the major manufacturers, whereas just about everything I'm interested in, nobody ever seems to be interested in making, with the exception of the Le Mans Spitfires. I think that's about the only car that I've ever been interested in that they've actually made. You know, like the turbo, the Pontiac Trans Am turbo with the turbo that goes off to the side. You know, I've never seen that done in 132 scale. It's in 143rd, 125th, but not 132nd. Yeah, I seem to be the exact opposite. I must be really weird in my choices. Of course, if you've been watching on Facebook, my album choices, you'll see I'm all over the place with my taste.
Well, everybody just needs to pick more obscure cars, is what it is. You know, stop picking popular cars, everybody. Stop. Just pick something. Just look way down on the roster of cars in a race, and then do one of those. There you go.
Or just make a livery with cigarette manufacturers. At least here in the States, you probably won't be able to sell them. I don't know about anywhere else in the world, but you can't do that over here. Joe Camel would be cool. Very unique. Electric would never make it. So, you know.
Fairly easy, too, because it's basically just yellow with all the decals.
Exactly.
Yeah. Probably not good for your STEM project, though, Jeff.
Yeah. Slotted made some cigarette liveried cars, and they put extra decals over the top that you could remove with the fingernail, which is a really good idea.
Yeah,
I've always liked the JPS. That's nice, Alan.
Yeah, it's an NSR 8689, and this one I fully expect NSR to deliver this at some point, but because of the comment about the tobacco livery, and there's someone at the club, Gary Cannell from MRE, has, I believe, done the camel livery for the same car. So there's a lot of liveries at NSR. And again, this is an NSR Mosler type thing. This doesn't really represent any particular car. This is a generic kind of end of the 1980s Formula car. And I only bought one of these. This is the one I painted up and got working. And it's really quite impressive on track. But for me, it looks even better black. So I'm hoping NSR don't make this for another couple of years.
Well, you did it first.
Good luck.
Always best because it's yours. It's your creation. Yeah, I think they did a smart thing, you know, not trying to represent a specific F1 car from that era. Just kind of make it look like they more or less all looked like of that era, and then they can just slap whatever color job they want on it, and people will say, "Oh, that's close enough to that." And
it fits with their racing philosophy, doesn't it? Because it's all about, and when at speed, you can't tell the difference, the subtle differences. You know, and it's a great leveler. At the end of the day, it's down to you know, it's down to how good you are as a driver. Then, not whether you've got luckily you've got the best chassis or, you know, the best car in that particular grid. If they're all the same and you're all at the same level of tuning, then it's all down to how good you are as a driver.
You know, I've heard this argument a lot of times, and no matter what we've done at the club cars, everyone's got to race the same. We provide the cars, we swap the cars around. The best guys always win. So you may put it down to the tuning of their cars, so you may think it is, but it really isn't. And when I get to do scrutineering, my teammates for the disco racing, Graham, Eldridge, Wizard, you know, whenever I take other people's cars apart, are allowed to put carbon fiber front axles in, titanium rear axles, magnesium wheels, all sorts of clever esoteric stuff. I opened his cars to do scrutiny. There is nothing special about the inside of his cars. It's all stock, standard stuff, and he is leaving everybody for dead. So the idea you can level people with technology, I think, is a kind of a lost idea. I really don't think that can ever be done.
But you can't level.
People
You
tend,
can't make them all.
people tend to fish up closer.
Not level the people.
Go ahead, Marty.
Alan, you're right. You can't level the people. You can level the cars, but it just, in some ways, it shows just how much better the good driver is.
Yeah, but
And the good
they don't
builder.
win by quite such a grand margin when you're sharing cars, because a lot of mid-pack runners and tail-end runners just don't know how to put a car together very well. So, you know, it sort of closes the gap a bit, and it gives the mid-pack and the back of the pack guys something to aim for.
Yeah, they know it's their finger and not the car. Yeah.
Some
The other
people
thing
don't
is
want
that-
to- Sorry, Mark, carry on.
I was just going to say that the other thing is, though, it stops the checkbook racing if you've got a consistent set of rules for each class. There was one thing that always concerned me when we set our Hawke's Bay club up, that we've got 2 or 3 of us that could just fill our cars with the most expensive stuff, have the motors custom done, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And that was the last thing we wanted. We wanted to keep the club accessible, knowing that we would keep getting better, both at building and driving, and you guys would come along. We had to try and keep that entry barrier down a little. And we do it other ways as well, but one of the ways is keeping class rules simple and not box stock, but a range of levels of tune that gives the guys that love to build, perhaps like Alan, that love to build, something they can do in that class, but in another class it might be it's a glued and trued Skeletric with some good tyres on the back and 10 grams of lead, whatever. But we try and keep the build cost down.
Yeah, I think some of you guys have raced in Worthing, right? I think they do that a lot to keep it simple and you know, real simple rules. You know, maybe different wheels, maybe different tires. I know they changed the tires. I know there's a certain amount of weight, but most of the cars are pretty much stock Skeletric.
We do that at Pontiac simply because we're in quite a economically deprived area, and the barrier to entry, you know, is huge if you're asking people to spend lots of money. So we try to, even though it's digital and you're looking at £12 for a chip, we try to keep the cost of each class below £40, which can be done. And we have one tuning class where there's a gentleman's agreement. You don't spend more than 60. So it is very much box stock. You know, people learn how to tune their cars then. The only thing you can do is change your braid and run your motor in, you know, and keep everything clean and lubricated. That's half the battle, is reminding everybody in the club, especially the newbies, to take the carpet fluff out of their axles. That gives you an extra 3/10. You know, I even build cars for people. You know, quite often I'll build them a car if they're new, and you know, to the same standard I do. You know, and it's lapping a lap slower at the end of the season because they haven't done anything to it.
Yep, and of course there's always, you know, not only single class and, you know, single manufacturer, single car, you know, classes or whatever kind of thing to level the playing field. There's also IROC, you know, host provided cars or club cars, you know, so everybody rotates the cars, rotates the lanes, you know, however you want to do it. So everybody gets to race every car, or analog, everybody races every lane and the cars stay in the lane, whatever. That's always the ultimate field flattening type of racing. Sometimes in the past, I was not part of this club when they were still doing it, but they ran IROC races with Skeletric controllers. You know, at the time the club was allowing, you know, Professor Motor and other more advanced controllers, but when they did the IROC race, not only did you race the club cars, but you raced with the regular old Skeletric controllers too. So you couldn't even have your nice controller. And so it was super flat playing field.
You mean the old telephone ones?
I don't know the specific models that they were using, but they were all just Yeah,
That's
I mean,
a digital controller.
but yeah, the analog, Scholastic controllers, probably the ones that were like phaser, a Star Trek phaser shape.
Yeah, they're also known as the telephone ones. Like, I just saw you using your corded telephone there, Greg.
Hey,
It's easier with digital in some respects because a decent true speed controller is about £45. And everybody at the club has got a true speed controller because they are so much better than the Scalextric standard ones. The springs, is a better trigger reach, and the springs a bit softer. You can end up with severe finger fatigue when you've been racing 4 back-to-back 15-minute heats with a Scalextric controller. But no, I feel sorry for the analog guys because it does become, and I agree with what Mark said, I think about a spending war. And that is the problem. Are you really going to beat somebody with a £300 controller with your £20 Palmer? Probably not. But then, are you going to be that much better if you spend £300 on that controller? Probably not. And it becomes a bit elitist then.
Nah, it's a specious argument, that is, Rich. We've had this out before. I could give Steve Jones a £10 Palmer controller, and I give him a £300 Cobra controller, and he's going to whip my ass.
Yeah, it's still
It's
going
that simple. It's a specious argument. I don't go out and buy a new driver or a new sandwich. I go out and buy a controller. It's what I want to waste my money on. It doesn't make me a better driver. It's my thing.
Yeah.
It's a specious argument.
I beat Steve last time we raced.
That's as false an argument as the club cars.
I think
something you say it and Mike Hamilton say it all the time. It's a lot of nonsense.
No, what I'm saying is, it's the spend. If people feel obliged to spend £300 on a controller to compete, they're not realising that they won't be able to. It just scares people off.
Can my father-in-law have a better drive with his brand new Ping driver than my 20-year-old Ping driver? No, he can't.
But Martin, I think you're missing one point. You're dealing with people who may not be good or may not have a lot of money, but don't want to be Taylor and Charlie all the time. And so you set your club up so you've got a bit of everything for everybody as much as possible. And also, because we've got guys in the club, like we got Munter in my club. He couldn't care less whether he races. He just wants to build things. And we've got guys that couldn't care less about Senior Cup. They just want to be able to turn up and hope that in their box there's a car of the right class, or if not, something roughly close to it. And they spend 5 minutes a year on maintenance. The club's bigger than the racing and the winning. It's about the people. And so we try and put something in there for all the people. And after we started 2007, and we still have half our members are the founding members. That's the good bit. We've got about 15 members, which is about equal to the max we've ever had, and half of those have been there since the start, and we haven't had a hissy fit or a walkout in about 10 years. So to me, that's more important than whether we win. We often don't even look at the results of races. We know that there's going to be himself and Mac and Dave, and one other guy will probably be the 4 top each week. Some classes we don't even get that far because they know, well, I'm going to win Group 5 and I'm going to win the Scalextric BTCC class. Matt's going to win GT1. We kind of know that, but we try and keep it so that's fun. It's a bit of fun for everybody. And one other thing is, as we're talking about the different classes of racing and the IROC and stuff, Greg, we also run IROC teams events about every 3 months or 2 to 3 months, separate to club night generally. And we don't quite pull the drivers out of a hat. We'll nominate 4 team captains, which will be 4 of the best builders if we're building and racing, and best drivers. And then we put in our B drivers and our C drivers, and we try and make the teams as level as possible. We might go 1,500 laps in 3 or 4 hours racing, and be less than 20 laps between 3 of the teams at the end of it. And that's the most fun you can have without getting under a bus with a bottle of whiskey.
I think
That's something
I think as far as controllers go, it's nice when a club allows people to spend $50 or $500 on a controller, because there are the guys who really can get that extra 100th of a second using that controller because of anti-spin or whatever. But when you have a new member and they see the best racer using the best, most expensive controller, and they think, oh, well, if I had the most expensive controller, I'd do better too. And then before talking to some of the more reasonable members and being told, no, you should go ahead and keep racing with your $50 controller until you can not crash during an entire race before you go dropping $500 on a third eye or something like that. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't get that wisdom, and they go out and they drop their big cash on an expensive controller, and then they're still crashing and losing races. And they're wondering, is there something wrong with my controller? It must not be the right expensive controller for me. And then they go drop another couple $100 on another controller, and it's like, no, just back off a little bit.
Learn to drive properly
One
first.
controller until you can make it through a race.
The argument for a better controller, digital type controller, really isn't that it gives you better control or gives you an advantage. The argument I always put is that I use a slotted SCP2 because it works, and it works all the time. And before I had that, I used the DS controllers, which are okay. But if you're in the middle of the race and then suddenly you start to feel that ratcheting happening on the rear stack, that's starting to burn out, that's going to ruin your race. Plus, if you use a rear stack controller, you need a 25, 35, 45 ohm one. So those are going to mount up, and you need to do maintenance. My SCP needs no maintenance. I plug it in, I go. I've been using it for 2.5 years now, non-stop at all. So, and then there's the argument, well, if you're going to go digital racing, you're going to do disc. I use my controller, I put a different cartridge in, I'm onto digital racing. So the idea that spending, I think it was about £115 in total on my first SCP2 was some kind of exuberant kind of spending isn't really a lot. It's a good, proper, functional, basic digital controller. And so if someone comes to me and says, what should I get? I'll just say, use the club controllers for now. But when you come to want to use something, you have to decide if you're going to use digital, and then you may want to use one of these, but have a look, and there are lots of others around. But certainly, and then there's that argument about, it's not an argument. We don't have people at the club using SCP2s and beating everybody. Graham Eldridge uses a knackered old Palmer, and he's absolutely hammering everybody. So the youngsters look up at that. They're not thinking that we're getting advantages through using the SCP2. So, I don't think it's an argument to say that digital controllers bring an advantage. They bring reliability and adaptability, and that's why I'd always advocate.
I'm certainly a big fan of slotted controllers. It was the SCP-1 was the first controller that I got when I started with Scholastic Digital, so I just had the set controllers. But then when I started with the Analog Club, I wanted to get my own controller, and at the time, the SCP-1 was fairly new, good price, and had all those knobs. And most of the analog guys are like, "There's too many knobs, I can't figure it out." And I was like, "No, just play with one knob at a time, and you'll figure it out." But yeah, I've SCP-1, then I got a 1.1 for my son, and then I got a 2 later on when those come out. Which brings me to my next topic. Somebody actually suggested talking about the SCP-3. And for those who aren't aware of what the SCP-3 is, essentially it is a slotted SCP-2 with wireless for oxygen or Scholastic Arc Air or Pro built into the controller itself. So you don't need a cartridge of any kind to do oxygen racing or use that controller with your Arc Air or Pro Scholastic set. It has a built-in battery connector and a built-in cellular phone style charging system. They don't sell the battery, they don't sell the controller with the battery, but you can pretty much get the necessary battery from any hobbyist store that sells RC of pretty much any kind, or of course Amazon or eBay or whatever. You get the right kind of battery, you plug it into the controller handle, you'll basically put the battery in where the cartridge normally goes. Plug it in, and then plug in a cell phone charger that fits into the connector at the back, and then you've got yourself a totally wireless controller that'll work for oxygen or Scalextric ARC. But of course, being a slotted SCP controller, take the battery out and put in your analog cartridge or whatever other cartridge. They're also doing apparently the range, the strength of the wireless in that particular controller straight out of the box is not especially strong, but it's good for home racing, ARC, Scalextric ARC racing, or oxygen racing on not a ginormous gymnasium-sized track, but probably a regular club-sized track should be sufficient. But they're also going to be selling a plug-in board. I thought it was going to be a cartridge for extended range, but apparently it's not going to be a cartridge. It's going to be a plug-in board. So you'll open up the shell of the controller and plug another board into the big main controller board, and have it still be the battery and the handle and everything like that. I'm looking forward to picking one up, of course, because I'm big into digital and oxygen, and I've got the ARC sets and stuff like that. And of course, since I can plug in my analog controller, analog cartridges and continue using it, I'll probably switch to that as my primary controller, just in general. Does anybody have any questions about the SCP-3 or commentary on the development of SCP controllers in general, or pretty much anything related to slotted controllers?
What do they cost?
I think at first he was wanting the SCP-3 to retail at $99 US, but I don't think that is happening. I think it's still going to be retailing at like 130, 120, something like that. And I think that
125 euros, we've been told.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that might be because they kind of changed what their plans were. At first, they were going to have the controller be limited in functionality until you made like basically an in-game purchase on their app. They're developing an application for smart devices that lets you register your new device. It's currently working on their Type C oxygen chips. You register the chip that starts your warranty and lets you upgrade the firmware and things like that. They were planning on having the controller be similar, that you register the controller through the app to start your warranty, as well as paid unlocking of additional features. I don't think that's their plan anymore. I think it's basically going to come straight out of the box, just like all their other controllers, but I believe it's still going to require you to register in order to activate your warranty through the app.
It's too complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not a real big fan of that whole thing, and I think it'll be a deterrent for a lot of more traditional slot racers, but I think for their target market, the people who are already planning to use it for oxygen racing, or the people who have an ARC set, they want to get a fancier controller for their ARC set, probably won't stop them at all. If they're looking at, they want to upgrade their controller, pretty much the only option for ARC is going to be the SCP-3. So they don't really have any other options as far as an upgrade controller. So, if they want to move beyond a trigger and 2 buttons, then they'll probably just deal with it. But I don't know what the specifics are anymore, so don't hold me to anything that I've said regarding what their app does or does not do, or what the controller will or will not do when it comes out of the package. I'm hoping that it's just, full on SCP-3, and, they want you to register using the app for their warranty.
Greg,
I'll stick to my number 2, I think.
The SCP-2 is good. No, not a big reason to switch from it.
I've got an SCP-02. I must admit, I still keep going back to my true speed. It's something about about that contactless Hall sensor. It doesn't feel like I'm in control. It's a weird thing. Plus the fact we had terrible trouble syncing, because if you try to connect your SCP-2 to a different power supply than the one that's supplying your APB, it doesn't work. You have to vampire off exactly the same, even if you got one right next to it, off the same extension cable, you have to be off exactly the same, because otherwise if the waveform's out of sync, it doesn't work. It took us ages to figure that one out. But doesn't TrueSpeed have a wireless controller? They must be going to adapt that for ARC, I would have thought. I mean, it's an obvious market for them.
I thought they did, actually.
I don't believe they have. They do have a wireless controller, and I have a True Speed wireless set. Most of the guys in the digital club draw have. We started out with the wired True Speed controllers, brake controllers, but then they worked with SCS for their wireless. SCS was producing the box that you plug into the base, and then belt clip modules that you plug your controller into. One of the guys actually picked one of those up when it was that. But then TrueSpeed worked directly with SCS to include the transmitter in the controller itself. So we pretty much all jumped on board. We did a bulk buy and bought a bunch of controllers, as a group to kind of, reduce the shipping costs and stuff like that. And so that's actually what we still continue to use. One or two of the other guys has an SCP controller and has kind of gotten it to work with their Scalextric Digital. But when it came down to it, all those wires and stuff like that, and it just wasn't convenient enough. And for most of the other members, it was more expensive to, it was out of their hobby budget, slot car hobby budget to purchase one in the first place. And then having to either come up with your own portable, a battery for the digital cartridge to work off of, or like I rigged my track up to have power plugs at all the driver stations for that purpose. But it just became too much of an ask for the other guys to provide that kind of support for SCP controllers when only a couple of us had it. So we basically just kind of standardized on TrueSpeed wired or wireless controllers. But I can see clubs in the future starting with ARC bases. Like most of our guys still have the APB for their track, but we've got people joining in now recently with the ARC bases. So I can see SCP-3s becoming more commonplace in maybe a couple of years.
Yeah, I think there's
Just about
probably
a year ago. Sorry, Rich.
No, carry on, Martin.
About a year ago, I decided I wanted to go oxygen at home, so I wanted a second controller. And then I thought, well, the SCP-3 is coming out, so I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And now I'm finally getting one. It's just so that, my wife or the kids or a visitor can race digital with me at home. I know it's not going to work at Henley and the Disco events because the range isn't good enough, but now the piggyback board will make it good. I just need another controller, which means I've got a cheap SCP-2 going for somebody in the club, which is our club as well. We like, the club champ drives an SCP-2, he whips us with it. We got all these fancy things with steam engines on them, and he just turns up an SCP-2, goes twiddle, 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 push, beats us. But what the beauty of those things is, as you say, you can use so many different systems with an SCP-2, or hopefully now with an SCP-3. That they're just a fine controller. Don't ever ask Maurizio what the button on top does, though, because 40 minutes later he'll have such confusion going on. He'll draw your maps and he'll show you curves, and I still don't know what it does. It takes me,
medium and slow, Martin.
To go back to somebody else's point, I just crashed sooner.
Yeah. You were going to say something, Mr. Modifier?
Actually, I find I think the SCP-2 is probably it's that another step, isn't it? And I think if you've got enough like-minded people that want to really get the best out of their cars, in a club situation, it's just another barrier to entry because it's confusing as hell. I've tried my SCP-2 at home. I've got it working on my power upgraded APB. And to be honest, I cannot notice much difference between the extremes of the various knobs. It took me, I spent hours and hours trying to figure out what the difference was. And I still managed somehow to lap just as quickly with my TrueSpeed. So I don't know, it may be certain sort of club tracks it's sorted to. Mine's quite a technical sport track. So my longest straight is 4 meters and the rest of it is mostly bendy bits. And I don't know, perhaps, the traction control didn't seem to do any good. Maybe I'm just not a good enough driver to get the best out of an SCP-2. I like the technology, it's a good idea, but it's just that little bit too much of a faff. It's not exactly plug and play. Maybe too many controls, and maybe if there was a panic reset button on it to take it back to factory settings, then maybe that would work. But yeah, I don't know. I think that the problem with a lot of the guys who I race with, they look at all those knobs and buttons and say, just put everything in the middle. And,
no, not the middle. No.
Use just like
Move
the
everything to
true
left.
speed.
I honestly don't think the slotted controllers are any good for analog racing.
Oh,
I don't think they are.
now you're up for a battle here.
Oh, look,
The SCP2 is a brilliant digital controller, but for analog, you need a true speed. Well, at our club, you need a true speed, definitely.
Well, as someone who's been using the SCP-1 and 2 for analog racing for 10 years, I find that the easiest thing, and I've been teaching other guys how to use the controller as well. If they've been using a resistor-based controller with a stiff spring and a short trigger, they're going to have a hard time changing to an SCP, and it's not because of all the knobs so much as it feels completely different. And like Richard was saying, it doesn't feel like there's a connection between the controller and what the car is doing. But what I've found is that's really more of a tactile thing and whether or not you're used to how the trigger moves. Because I started with the SCP controller, and I can run rings around the guys who are, bringing third eyes to the party, and not because the SCP is that much better. I'm a good driver, but I know how to use the SCP. I know how to tweak the knobs. And I think, Richard, if you were to play with it more on an analog track, and I will agree that it's not quite, all those knobs aren't quite so helpful for Scalextric digital, mainly because the brake isn't really that helpful for Scalextric digital. But when you can plop, basically, I've come to the point with my SCP controller that looking at a car and knowing what kind of car it is, I know exactly where to turn each knob to get the kind of performance that I want out of that car on whatever track we're running on. And it's
I keep a book in my kit box. I keep a book. Every car, every track I use, I'll tweak them. I'll get all the settings right, and then I'll write it all down. So it doesn't matter where I go, what car I use. I can just pick up the car, get the controller, and you've got a baseline to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've told people one of my friends who recently got into the hobby and got an SCP controller for, used for cheap. I had him come over to my track just so that I could get him to understand what the knobs do. Before he had that opportunity to come over my track and learn from the pro, I was telling him to basically, once he tweaks the knobs and thinks the car is racing the way he wants it to, take a picture. Use his phone, take a picture of the knobs and make sure it's in focus. And then
have the car in the picture too. Also have the car in the photograph. That's important.
But when it comes down to it, it was rule number 1, don't change more than one knob at a time. Never, ever change more than one knob.
Yeah,
until you understand what every single knob actually does. And then it was just a matter of, like Richard was saying he was trying to do, turn it to the extreme and play with the car and see how it performs. Turn it to the other extreme and play with the car and see how it performs. And understanding what each knob does. The anti-spin is practically useless up until it gets way up high, and then sometimes it's not useful at all. And it's pretty much only useful for cars that have really hot motors. You don't really need anti-spin. Your finger is anti-spin for most other cars. And then the yellow knob is your typical sensitivity. That's as soon as you touch the trigger, that's how fast it's going to go, and you're depending on your dip switch settings. And I basically told him for the switches and stuff on top, for the older controller, SCP-1 with the 2 little dip switches, just put it in this mode, and then the blue knob becomes your maximum, right? So if you have a really hot car and you can't use full power, turn that one down, and then your brake is, how much brakes you want to use. And it was actually more effective for him to learn how to use that controller when I told him to hold the car hold the rear wheels off the track. This is especially effective for anti-spin. Crank the anti-spin all the way up and pull the trigger, and you can hear the motor going zzz, because anti-spin is turned up. Then you understand what anti-spin is actually doing. You turn the anti-spin all the way down, you pull the trigger, and it goes zzz, right off the bat. So you understand what it's doing. And you can do the same thing with the minimum, the yellow knob. Just barely touch the trigger. You crank that all the way up, you barely touch the trigger, and it's going to go at half speed pretty much. Turn that all the way down, you barely touch the trigger, and the motor doesn't move at all. And same for brakes. So one knob at a time. Do it with the car wheel off the track, and sooner or later you're going to find your sweet spot for that controller. And the funny thing is, now I know how to turn all the knobs. Half the time I don't even turn the knobs. I just have, this knob's here and this knob's there and that knob's there, and I can pretty much drive any car. So then we come back around to, you just got to learn how to drive, and you can pretty much put any controller into any good slot racer's hand, and they're going to be able to drive that car around the track.
One thing I have
many years ago with one-to-one racing, I did drag racing for 25 years. It's one thing you learn. You only change one thing at a time. You change more than one thing, you don't know which thing made the difference. You just change one thing. All right, it'll take you maybe potentially twice as long or 3 times as long to find the solution. But instead of chasing your tail all the time, you know whether that one thing made a difference or didn't.
One thing I haven't heard anyone talk about was the controller spring. I mean, I know Richard early on was saying about the light trigger finger, and I think Nick may have referred to something like that. None of the guys in my club will use an SCP. Thanks so much, guys. I use my DeFalco most of the time, but if I do use my SCP, I use the one I put a high-tech upgrade into. It comes from Professor Motor, and it costs about $2. It's a stiff spring, and everybody that tries the SCP that's not used to it for analog racing go, oh, it's got no feel. What they really want is a stiffer spring. And I know about half a dozen guys around the country at least that have said to me, hey, I've taken out the standard spring and put a Palmer spring or a Professor Motor controller spring into it. It feels like a different controller to use. Maybe it's just us big old guys or something. I don't know.
Well, I started with the SCP, so that was what I learned is slot car racing feel. So the guys who started with heavier triggers or stiffer springs are going to want those stiffer springs. Richard?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what it is. The SCP's got no feel for me. Maybe if I did stiffen the spring up, it would make a difference. I mean, I guess probably the main reason I don't use it too much is because if I took it down the club, because I'm generally the fastest guy on the track, then it just alienates the rest of the guys even more. It's almost like saying, hey guys, if you want to catch me, you got to spend another £130 to stay in the game. And I don't want to do that. I'm more interested in keeping people turning up to the club than to scare them away. And in fact, sometimes if I 2 years ago, I won every class in the club, and I purposefully, and we carried 2 classes over, I purposely didn't do anything to those 2 cars we carried over for the rest of the season. And then the guys were beating me because it's no fun when you're always out in front. I'd much rather have a close race than to be miles in front. Mark was waving.
I think you're leaving. Are you leaving, Mark?
Hi, Mark.
Oh, he's trying to talk. You're muted, Mark, and I didn't do it.
Sorry, no, that was me. I was just saying I'm going to go and start my day. This thing got me up about 2.5 hours ago. So it's now morning. It gets me up when it's still dark.
All right.
So, yeah,
your day, Mark.
some day now. See you.
Cheers, Mark.
Take care, mate.
Bye.
And we're at the 2-hour mark, and I think we've had a very lively debate. I'm going to stop the recording, but the chat will continue. So if you are watching this at a later date and want to take part in Slot Car Chat, please take keep an eye out for my announcements, and you'll be able to hit the link and join us. And hope you guys all had a good time, and we'll see you again next week.